It's Fan Fiction Friday. Let's see what you cooked up this week. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Friday, January 10th, 2025. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Fan Fiction Friday, the show where we react to your Mariners trade ideas and grade them on the 20/80 scale based on things like creativity, uniqueness, and viability. But before we get into your trades, quick shout out to our title sponsor today, FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. All you have to do to check that out is click the link in the description of this episode. Kicking us off here on Fan Fiction Friday, it's a simple 1-for-1 from UW reply guy Christopher Morel from the Tampa Bay Rays to Seattle for Logan Evans.
Yeah, it's probably too light, but I did like the idea of at least talking about Christopher Morel because we've talked about just seemingly every infield option you could think of, but I don't think we've talked about Morel once, and we talk about the Rays all the time. Morel had a terrible year god awful year last year, and he's not really much of a glove, so you kind of have to really believe in the bat here for him to be all that interesting. But he has played third base; it's primarily where he played last year. But again, he's not very good at third. In fact, he's terrible, let's say. Like he's bad. He's objectively bad at third base. He was a -1 win player last year. So you really have to buy in the bat. The year before, he was a 121 WRC plus. So, 247, 313, 508. This last year, Morel, 196, 288, 346. There are strikeouts concerned. It was 31% in 2023. Last year was 26%. He actually walks a fair amount. This year was 10%. Year before was 8.4. So it's not that he's, wildly swinging or anything like that. It's just he not very good. He is kind of a one-trick pony.
It was a bad year. Yeah, it was a very, very bad year last year. Yep.
Right. And so if he hits 247 with a 313 on base and he can slug 500 like he did in 2023, that's still a useful bat. And you kind of try and figure out what to do with the glove. Maybe you can help him get close to average, but he's played pretty much all over the ballpark, and he just really hasn't found a position that he's even okay at.
Yeah, so, -11 outs above average last year at third base, and that was only in 579 innings.
Right.
By the way, that's quite the accomplishment, and not in a good way.
So yeah, I think your valuation is off. I do think Morel is interesting. He is one of those guys who you'd be buying low on and trying to bet on the bounce back, which is looking more and more like something the Mariners are going to want to do. They've been linked to Yoan Moncada recently. So clearly there's some aspect where they're going to have to rely on a bounce back. And Morel is at least young. He's athletic. He actually isn't terrible at second base. So maybe he's your second baseman. Maybe he's an outfielder for you and he's part of that rotational mix. But yeah, if you think you can get him back to what he was in 2023, he's a steal. He's probably going to be a steal because you get him for 3 years. If you get what you got last year, you pretty much just wasted whatever prospect you gave up. And so you do have to be careful here. And that's why I don't think I would feel comfortable giving up more than somebody in that Logan Evans range, but I don't think the Rays would do it at that point. There's just not enough upside for them there. So I think
no.
Probably say no.
Yeah, if you could find some middle ground where it's like Ty Pete and then maybe Logan Evans on top of that, or Michael Morales.
Harry Ford straight up, who apparently the Rays have had interest in.
I mean, I would even throw in Logan Evans on top of Harry Ford.
Yeah, it's
to take the shot on Morel.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because again, like you said, if you can get him back to at least close to 2023 and I get that guy for 3 years, I'll figure out where he can play. It's a good hitter. It helps.
Right. And if he isn't able to get back to what he was, and he's just kind of a replacement level player, which would be a drastic improvement over what he was last year, like losing Harry Ford and Logan Evans, like it's not devastating to you. It's a bummer, but it's not devastating to you. And so you have to be really careful with Morel, but I do think he's an interesting name.
Yeah, for sure.
So I this one like a 40.
Yeah. I don't think this even really gets anywhere.
Yeah.
But you gave us an interesting conversation, so I'll go 40. Mike has a deal with the Cardinals, Nolan Arenado, and $7 million for Mitch Haniger, Harry Ford, and Michael Arroyo.
Yeah, so this question's in here because obviously, yesterday Arenado was kind of the big name that got thrown around Mariners Twitter because he's apparently open to waiving his no trade clause. Now that's according to
who did that come from? Yeah, exactly.
Right. So like, but it does sound like he is at least, open to the idea. Doesn't mean he'd definitely do it, but he'd consider it. Now, maybe this is a ploy by his agent to try and drum up leverage between the Red Sox and the Tigers, who are both apparently kind of like they're waiting out the Bregman market, and whoever doesn't get Bregman is probably going to pivot towards Arenado. So maybe he's just doing this to try and put some pressure on him, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, the problem with Arenado that we talked about yesterday on our Patreon, which you guys can listen to, it's only the $3 tier episode too. So consider it a test run. But the problem with Arenado is the deferred money is what it really is at the end of the day. Because right now, as things stand, if the Cardinals don't need any money over the next 3 years, which are probably likely to be the worst 3 years of Arenado's career because he's 34, he's trending down, blah, blah, blah. You're going to pay him 3 years and about $56 million, I think is the number, roughly, which, for a bad player isn't very good, but Arenado was a 3-1 player. That's not terrible. If they take Haniger, then his contract drops down to basically 3 and 36, and that's very reasonable. $12 million a year for a 2 to 3-1 player is a very good deal. But between now, and this has already started, but between now and I believe it runs through 2041. Yeah, 2041. Arenado is due $2 to $3 million every single one of those years in deferred money. So it ends up being 40 million-ish, give or take, extra $1 million that you owe this guy over the course of the next 15 years. Do the Mariners seem like a team that's going to take on that type of commitment?
Should that be a big deal to the Mariners? No. Is it
going to be?
Yes.
Yeah, of course it is. So not only would the Cardinals have to probably take on Haniger's money to make Arenado affordable this year, but they would also probably have to chip in, and I would guess pay at least half of the deferred money. Now, we did hear that when Arenado turned down the Astros trade, when he invoked his no trade clause to the Astros, that the Cardinals were apparently willing to kick in $15 to $20 million, which is essentially them taking on Haniger's contract.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated deal. I think that the deferred money makes this deal basically impossible. The $7 million, I don't think is enough money in addition to taking the Haniger contract to offset that. So
what? All right. So what does Arenado do this year?
Just this year?
Yeah, just this year.
I believe it's $20 million plus $2 million in deferred money.
Okay,
which the Cardinals may have already paid. I don't know exactly what date that has to be paid out, but
okay, so 21 plus the 2, so let's call it 23.
Sure.
For now, maybe they've already paid it, whatever, but let's just call it 23. So you're saving 17 and a half with Haniger.
Or 15 and a half, who really knows?
Yeah, yeah. And then you're also getting $7 million. So Arenado's paid for in 2025. Right. And then some, a little bit. Right. But so then you're looking at 16 next year, 15 the year after that. So 31 plus the 40-ish million
in deferred
money. Yeah.
Really, it comes down to a 3-year, $76 million contract. And it's not technically that because, again, the deferred money, blah, blah, blah. But like that's the commitment. Arenado is $70 million, and he's only going to play at most 3 years for you. For the player Arenado is right now, the Mariners probably don't think he's worth that. Should they care about the deferred money? No. Do they?
No, absolutely not.
Of
Yeah.
course they do. So I don't think Arenado trade is going to happen for that reason. In terms of your valuation, if the deferred money didn't exist at all, I would assume you're in the ballpark with this. Like, I think this is about right. So, it's tough to grade this because you're not factoring in the deferred money, or if you are, you're not factoring it in, nearly.
I'll just go 50. I'll go 50.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the valuation is about right, but the deferred money is a huge X factor here, and I don't think it's likely, it's possible, but it's highly unlikely that the Mariners are even interested in Arenado for that reason specifically.
Yeah,
but we'll see. So yeah, I'll go 50.
Yeah. All right, we are going to go over more of your trades here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Gametime. So I used to live in New Mexico, and down in New Mexico, there are 0 pro sports teams, and a lot of bands and artists that I listen to skip going there more often than not. So when I moved to Toronto, where there's a baseball team, a basketball team, a hockey team, even a soccer team, and there's great music being played every night in the city, I was right in my element. When I want to catch a ball game, or my wife and I want to see a band, I always get my tickets through Gametime. And that was the case well before Gametime sponsored our network and before I even joined the network, because it is truly the best ticketing service out there, hands down. I truly believe that. And now it's getting even better thanks to Gametime Picks. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I can just go on the app, it'll show me the best deal right away, it'll show me the exact view I'll have, and most importantly, it'll tell me exactly what I'm going to pay with Gametime's all-in pricing, so there are no annoying little fees that pop up at the last second. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB, that's LOCKEDONMLB, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. It is Fan Fiction Friday. We're looking at some of your Mariners trade ideas. We got this one from Kieran, who has Harry Ford and Brock Roden going to Colorado for Michael Toglia.
There's a reason we don't do, there's a couple reasons. We don't do many Rockies trades on Fan Fiction Friday.
Their roster sucks.
Well, one, their roster sucks. Two, they might be the stupidest team in baseball. And they're basically impossible to work with. That Jerry DiPoto hasn't made a trade with them for a reason, so we don't do a lot of Rockies trades mostly because there's nobody on the roster really worth talking about outside of like Doyle, who's not going to happen. But we actually got like 3 or 4 Toglia trades, which is weird. So much so I actually did he get mentioned by somebody recently or no? So that was kind of out there. So I thought we'd talk about him a little bit because there seems to be some interest in him. Toglia is interesting. He's coming off of a 2-win season. That was B-War. I don't know what it was on F-War. Doesn't really hit for average, but he hits for good power. He is a reverse splits guy. He hits lefties better than he does righties, actually. And while his average and on base are better at Coors Field, he actually slugs significantly more away from Coors Field than he does at Coors Field. So that's
he's kind of an analytics darling right now. I've seen a lot of people
Savant page.
I was curious why we got so many trades this week, like specifically if there was a report, but in general, I know Toglia has a lot of hype around him, and there's a lot of people that believe he's going to break out here in the next year or two.
Yeah, you look at he's 90th percentile in xWOBA, 93rd in X slug, 91 in average exit velo, 98 in barrel, 94 in hard hit, 91 in launch angle sweet spot, 70th percentile bat speed. He walks a ton, 92nd percentile there. Can't play defense. He's a first baseman, not a very good one. And he does swing and miss a lot. He strikes out a lot. So, I get it. He's a left-handed bat. He's a first baseman. You need one of those. He's cheap, but he plays for the Rockies. And so while the Rockies should be selling literally everything and committing to like a 10-year rebuild, because that's what it's going to take. Their farm system is terrible too, by the way. They're not going to. They're stupid. They probably think Toglia is like Vlad Jr., and they're probably going to demand a package like that to even discuss him. So I don't think
we
Harry
want
Ford,
Colt Emerson, Las Montes, and Julio.
Right. LOL. We already have Luke Raley, who's probably right now he is better than Toglia. Click.
Sure.
So yeah. Toglia is interesting. Like I said, I looked at the Savant page. I was like, oh wow, that's a lot of red. You kind of look at, okay, is he a cores merchant? No, not really. Some degree, but not power, which is what you're most concerned about getting outside of cores. Is he a platoon guy? Do he and Rayleigh really fit on the roster together? Yeah, because Toglia hits lefties totally fine. So, yeah, he's interesting. It's the Rockies. So it's like,
yeah. So,
no.
Yeah, Kieran, you're probably not in the ballpark here.
Yeah, I think you're barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah.
Totally is interesting. Again, we got 3 or 4 offers, or 3 or 4 trades for him. So, yeah, much like we did with Nolan Arenado. So you pick one and you just talk about the player, because we haven't talked about Toglia because, again, we don't talk about the Rockies generally because they're not very talented, and B,
roster sucks.
They're the dumbest team in baseball. So there's a reason we don't do this. Might be the first Rockies trade we've done on Fan Fiction Friday, maybe the second. But like, yeah. So
I'm sure we've gotten some Brendan Rodgers in there, or Justin Lawrence. Or
well, I mean, there was a Ryan McMahon trade in there today.
Oh yeah, Ryan McMahon.
We've talked about McMahon, but like, no.
Yeah, he's just
he's Josh Rojas.
That's my reaction to pretty much every Rockies player. I'm just except for Brenton Doyle.
Yeah, and Toglia would be fine. Like, it'd be a good addition, but like,
I mean, you look at the numbers, for all the reasons that you just said, like, yeah, there's some things to get excited about there, but they're not gonna trade him for anything reasonable.
No. So I mean, like, if Toglia was on a different team, like, would this offer be enough to get him? I don't think so.
No.
So for me, it's like 40, 35, something like that.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. Zach has a deal with the Rays, Pete Fairbanks and Jonathan Aranda for Harry Ford, Ty Pete, and Ryan Bliss. This really comes down to how much do you like Pete Fairbanks? Yeah,
quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think you get him for 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. And then Aranda is kind of like a lottery ticket, really. There are some good things, but he's 26 years old. Did have a 113 WRC plus last year in 143 plate appearances. So, yeah, it's a bit of a risk that you're taking there. He's probably a first base only, which, limits him because he's a first baseman who doesn't hit for a ton of power, right? Like, obviously,
doesn't really hit for any power,
right? What do you
at
do
least over the wall power?
Right. What do you do with Luke Raley at that point? Can these guys coexist on the same, on the same roster if you want, primary first baseman and whatnot? Aranda couldn't hit lefties last year at all. Like, like Aranda is a good lottery ticket to take. I'm not trying to, bash the idea. I think Aranda is a fun addition, but you need Fairbanks. Like, you have to really like Fairbanks to be willing to pull off this deal. And I think I do, because again, I think Harry Ford, the ceiling is just slowly moving down and down on him. And Ty Pete is all ceiling, and he's 3-4 years away from the big leagues. So yeah, Ryan Bliss, I really don't care. Like, not that I don't like Ryan Bliss, but you have Dylan Moore, you have Louis, you have Rivas, you have other second base options, and you have Cole Young obviously coming up at some point this year as well. So Bliss to me is really not that big of a giveaway in this part. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's like Bliss for Aranda, which fine. The Rays would probably rather take a shot on Aranda, but then they get Ford and Pete, 2 players we know that they've liked in the past. For Fairbanks, they probably think they could do a little bit better, but the Rays they will settle sometimes for quality bulk over upside. So, yeah, I think this is interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's obviously two guys with Pete and Ford that the Rays love.
Or at least
have loved in the past.
Yeah.
I think they still do, but yeah.
Probably.
And you also give them a guy that's ready to take on major league innings at second base or somewhere up the middle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would think the Rays would do this for 2 years of Fairbanks?
Yeah, it's a little tough to judge right now because the relief market hasn't really taken off, particularly in the trade market. So we don't know what that looks like. But
that's kind of why I say that, though.
Right?
It's this feels like, I don't know. It feels like it lines up so much with what the Rays' philosophy has been in trades too.
Yeah. Trade a guy a year too early rather than a year too late. Well,
and Fairbanks is coming off the lat injury as well. Right. So there's going to be question marks. So
take shots on athletes. That's a very Tampa Bay Rays thing to do. And all three of these guys are really good athletes. So,
and Bliss can play now. Ford should be able to play at some point in 2025.
Right. And you have Danny Jansen is really your only catcher. You have no long-term catcher plans whatsoever. So, I'll give this one 45, 50, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty solid.
Yeah. I'll go 55 on this, actually. All right. So we are going to go over a couple more of your trades here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is once again brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. It's Fan Fiction Friday. We got a couple more of your trades to go over here. Dave has another Nolan Arenado deal with the Cardinals. This one also includes Lars Nootbaar. The Mariners are sending St. Louis Mitch Haniger, obviously, to cover some of the money like we talked about earlier. Harry Ford or Cole Young. I guess Dave
those are comparable.
Yeah. Dave apparently sees them as interchangeable. I disagree with that. Emerson Hancock and the competitive balance round A selection. So this one's a little bit difficult to assess because again, Dave is kind of viewing Young and Ford as interchangeable, which I don't think is accurate. So do you want to pick one, Colby, and grade it based off of that? How do you want to attack this?
I think we probably have to pick one, and I think it probably has to be Young.
Yes.
Because otherwise this is a non-starter for St. Louis. Also,
because I think Ford and the comp round A pick and Emerson Hancock covers the Arenado aspect of things if they're taking on Haniger's contract.
Right.
But you're also getting Lars Nootbaar in here. And that's Nootbaar for 3 years?
Yep.
So, yeah. So all right. So let's call it Cole Young, Emerson Hancock, competitive balance round A selection, and Mitch Haniger for Arenado and Nootbaar. What do you think?
Haniger and Arenado, fine for 1 year, but then if the Cardinals aren't kicking in any money, then you're on the hook for another $40 million in deferred, like we talked about in the first segment, and then also $30-ish million over the next 2 years on top of that. So right away, I think the deal's dead right there. But if we took the deferred money out of it, blah blah blah. Nootbaar for Cole Young, Emerson Hancock, and the comp round A pick. Honestly feels a little bit much for Lars Nootbaar. He's a good player, don't get me wrong, but and he has a really surprisingly good StatCast page if you're a big StatCast fan, lots of red. but he's a fourth outfielder for you, maybe a DH, or maybe he moves Randy Rosarena to DH. He's a good player. Nolan Arenado is still a pretty good player.
Yeah.
But the money that you're taking on from Arenado is so massive. Like, it is such a big deterrent for the Mariners.
Well, now Nootbaar is going to start making money as well, so you also have to factor that in to the equation here.
I think the money end, unfortunately, kills this for the Mariners. And I just question...
It unfortunately kills a lot of things for the Mariners.
Right. And I just question how much value the Mariners are going to place on Lars Nootbaar. And also, how much are the Cardinals going to value Lars Nootbaar? Because...
Apparently they valued him a lot 2 years ago. So
right. So and he's like a 2.5 win player. Like, that's what his ceiling is. And again, that's a valuable player. The Mariners certainly just need bats in general. And yes, you could absolutely make Nootbaar fit in the outfield, just like you could any outfielder. There is room to get at bats there. But you're talking about giving up Cole Young, who's supposed to be your second baseman, maybe starting this year. You're giving up the comp round A pick, which is also giving up $2.5 million in bonus pool money, and you're taking on all of Arenado's contract after this year, and including some of Arenado's money because Haniger himself can't offset that entirely. So it's an interesting thought. Nootbaar, we really haven't talked about this winter at all, which is a nice change of pace, honestly. So it's interesting.
We got our fill 2 years ago.
Right. It's interesting, but I think the money is just too big here. Too big of a problem, of a headache for the Mariners, especially since Young is going to be their starting second baseman, they think, for the next 3 years at league minimum, actually 4 years at league minimum, more than likely. So I think they probably balk at this deal. But it's interesting, like I think it's creative, and it's a new name, an old new name, I guess. I'd give it like a 45.
Yeah, I don't think it's enough for the Cardinals. I think there's a path to building on this and maybe making it work.
Yeah.
But I think as currently constructed, it's 40. Yeah, I'll go 45. NWFXC has a deal with the Twins, Willie Castro and old friend Justin Topa for Ben Williamson and Logan Evans.
Topa really didn't pitch last year. He's a big X factor, but obviously the Mariners are very familiar with him. Willie Castro, I didn't see what his ARB number came in at. I think it was around the 6.8 that like trade rumors projected. So whatever. We know about what he's worth. He's a 1-year rental player. Do you want to give up Ben Williamson for 1 year of Willie Castro? I would. And Evans for Topa feels like a bit of an overpay because Topa didn't pitch a lot last year. So I think you're actually overpaying a little bit here, but it is a seller's market, and this would be a selling move for the Twins, who are still looking to shed some payroll, but they probably would rather shed Christian Vasquez, which not going to happen. Certainly not with Seattle. So, this is it. I think 50.
Yeah. I mean, like, what are the Twins doing right now? Like, what are the Twins doing right now? Like, apparently
the Mariners have been doing, except the Twins have been doing it for the last 4 acquisition cycles.
Apparently they're going to get new ownership by opening day. That was the most recent report. But yeah, I mean, do they want to subtract? I mean, they're looking to trade Pablo Lopez, but what are they looking to trade Pablo Lopez for? I think that would kind of tip us off on what they're doing. Like, what exactly are they looking for in return for Lopez? If it's major league talent, then they're probably not going to move Willie Castro, even with only a year left. Because that probably signifies they think they can still make some noise this year.
Yeah, I mean, they're not wrong. I could see them winning the Central.
No, they have.
It's 1 year of Castro. You have a pretty stacked infield already. I think you still have Kyle Farmer even.
Do they?
I think
I thought he was a free agent.
Maybe. But they obviously.
Oh God, is that going to be the Mariners' third baseman? Oh, he went to the Rockies.
Oh, okay. So yeah, but it's still Royce Lewis. It's Carlos Correa. It's Brooks Lee. So is there room for Willie Castro? I mean,
Julian. Yeah,
they could play him in the outfield. Julian's also a guy I think the Mariners should probably look at. So yeah, I still think the Twins might trade an infielder, and if you're pinching pennies like the Twins are, trading the guy making $7 million who is, kind of your utility guy, really, more than anything, makes some sense. And they also have a bunch of young talent in the outfield that's going to come up at some point this year, more than likely. So I think Castro is going to get pushed out by July anyways. And if that's the case, why not trade him now and get something? So I think, Evans and Williamson basically for Castro, because again, Topa is just a throw in. I think that's pretty good return for 1 year of Willie Castro. So if I were the Twins, I would do this. It might be an overpay by the Mariners, but also I don't really care.
No, Willie Castro would really help.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would be more than willing to pay this, and I get to take a shot on Justin Topa again. It was really good for me.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully he's healthy.
Yeah. I would absolutely do this. I'm not convinced the Twins would. So I'm probably landing somewhere at a 50 on this. I could see it. I could also not see it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you all for your trade submissions. We got a lot this week. Unfortunately, we're only able to get to a handful of them on one particular episode, but really appreciate all the submissions this week. I think we had over 100 replies on
122, I think was the final count.
That might be the most we've ever had, actually. So yeah, really appreciate
most of them all
the submissions. Yeah. Which, I mean, that's going to happen.
It's bound to happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why typically, it's not necessarily the best trades I take. It's like, hey, people have been asking about this guy in a lot of different trades. Let's find one so we could talk about this individual player, like the Toglia thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
You see Michael Toglia 4 or 5 times. It may not seem like a lot out of 122 submissions, but when everybody else is Luis Castillo to Baltimore, Luis Castillo to Boston, it is like, okay, let's.
Yeah, I needed a break from the Castillo trades, to be honest with you.
Here. And so Toglia being asked about as much. And then sometimes it's somebody asking us about Christopher Morel. And even if the trade isn't, like a 55 or anything like that, it's still, hey, we haven't talked about Morel. That's interesting. Let's include this trade.
For sure.
So it's not always just about, trying to find the best and the worst trade so we can make fun of people, or we can be like, oh, that's a 70. Like sometimes it's about, hey, we haven't talked about that guy. That's interesting. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what it would cost, we think. And so, it's different criteria, but 122 submissions is a lot. So if you didn't get picked this week, sorry, try again next week. But obviously we can't do 122 trade. I mean, we're already way over time right now doing 7 or 8. So
yeah. All right. So thank you guys once again. That's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Tidy Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Tidy Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. We're also on Blue Sky. You can follow me at TDG, Colby at MLB Colby, and the show at Locked On Mariners. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.